Hello, everyone, and most welcome to 1695 of the series. We will today continue where we left off in 1686 with Wittgenstein mind reading and perception by Edmund Dain. And we looked at the difference between ordinary philosophers who claim that we cannot see or understand other people's expressions, their faces, nuances in bodily inclinations, attitudes. We will not be able to see the loving, caressing eyes of the mother or people we meet. Wittgenstein is pointing to that there is a possibility of seeing people's mind, thereby of course not saying that it is a correct view, but the possibility is there. And we left off at the fourth quote on page 678. Similarly, in remarks on the philosophy of psychology, volume 2, Wittgenstein writes as follows. In general, I do not surmise fear in him. I see it. I do not feel that I am deducing the probable existence of something inside from something outside. Rather, it is as if the human face were in a way translucent, and that I were seeing it not in reflected light, but rather in its own. In these remarks, we find Wittgenstein raising a number of objections to both the idea that we must interpret or make inferences from others' behavior and the idea that we must look inside ourselves or simulate or imitate others' expressions. In order to recognize what they are thinking or feeling. Instead, we find Wittgenstein repeatedly insisting that we can and do, in general, simply see one another's thoughts or feelings directly, for instance, in their eyes or face. In response to the idea that we must interpret or make inferences from others' behavior in order to recognize their thoughts or feelings. Wittgenstein notes that although we may do so, we do not always. We do in some cases interpret another's behavior as threatening or infer the presence of a threat from their behavior. But Wittgenstein implies those cases contrast with others in which there is simply no role for interpretation or inference to play. If an enemy points a knife at you or holds your gaze while drawing a finger across their throat, it would be absurd to insist that you merely interpret the behavior as a threat, or that you merely infer the presence of a threat from their behavior. The behavior constitutes a threat. That's just what it is. There is therefore no work for interpretation or inference to do. As a description of what transpires, it would simply be false in such a case to say that you interpret the behavior as a threat, or that you infer the presence of a threat from the behavior. Since to say as much would, among other things, be to imply a degree of uncertainty about the significance of their actions, that would be entirely unwarranted. The immediacy with which others' thoughts and feelings presents themselves to us in this way, Wittgenstein continues, is reflected in the terms we use in describing what we see. It is natural for us to describe someone's face in terms of the emotions we see there. That, not the vocabulary of physics or geometry, is the basic vocabulary that we use. Moreover, the ability to describe a face in terms of emotions is not dependent on the ability to describe the physical arrangements of its features. We may be unable to give any such description while nevertheless being able to describe another's emotional state with ease. It also does not seem to us, Wittgenstein writes, as if we do in fact, generally speaking, have to infer the presence of, say, fear in another from what we see. That, Wittgenstein claims, is not typically how it strikes us. The phenomenology characteristic of making inferences is often absent. Rather, the feeling often seems to be immediately and visibly present in another's face. Wittgenstein also rejects the idea that we must look inside ourselves or simulate another's movement in some way to recognize their thoughts and feelings. We do not need to look into ourselves to recognize the fury in another's face. Wittgenstein writes, since it is there as clearly as in your own breast, there's no need to look anywhere else. Moreover, the suggestion that we must simulate or imitate the movement of another's face in order to recognize what they are feeling. Wittgenstein writes, is nonsense, since it involves making assumptions about what must occur instead of simply describing what does. Wittgenstein then rejects both the idea that we must interpret or make inferences from others' behavior, and that we must look inside ourselves or simulate others' behavior in some way in order to recognize their thoughts or feelings. Instead, Wittgenstein claims we see emotion. We see in another's face joy, indifference, interest, excitement, torpor, and so on. Fury, fear. Just as we see the look you cast at someone. And if someone wanted to correct me and say that I do not really see it, Wittgenstein adds, I should take that for pure stupidity. Four, explaining mind reading. As a result of these and other similar remarks, Wittgenstein is often claimed to hold that our ability to read others' thoughts and feelings can be explained in terms of perception. Varga, for instance, describes Wittgenstein as one of the historical proponents that it is possible for S to see P's joy. Similarly, Overgaard claims that Wittgenstein holds that we can have direct perceptual access to others' specific thoughts and feelings. Quote from Overgaard. Wittgenstein points out that another's mental state and consciousness are manifested in her bodily appearance, and first and foremost in her facial expressions. That other people are minded and even to some extent their specific thoughts and feelings is something that we can have direct perceptual access to. It is something that we can directly see. Moreover, Varga and Overgaard are by no means alone in making such claims. Others include Gallagher, Smith et al. The kind of view that is attributed to Wittgenstein here, however, is not merely a view about the correct use of English and other languages. Wittgenstein is not taken simply to be reminding us that we call this seeing. A claim that would have no consequences for our understanding of the kind of process such seeing involves. Rather, Wittgenstein is taken to be making a claim about what it is that we here call seeing, namely that it is what we say it is and not something else. Wittgenstein's aim here as construed here, is not to remind us of our ordinary ways of speaking, but to vindicate them, to show them to be correct, not merely as a matter of lexicography, but as an explanation of the kind of underlying process involved. We can see that this is the kind of view attributed to Wittgenstein, not only from the lack of qualification with which Wittgenstein's claims are repeated, but also from the context within which that attribution is made. And especially from the fact that Wittgenstein's view is taken to contrast with the explanations of mind reading presented by some, and to agree with the explanations presented by others. Moreover, if Wittgenstein were being taken merely to be reminding us of the words we use in this context, his views would, without further elaboration or qualification, simply be irrelevant to this debate, and therefore not worth mentioning in this context. The fact that we use words such as seeing here, after all, not denied by any of the participants in this debate. Rather, what is at stake is the correct explanation of the process underlying the use of those words. And so whether our use of those words is in some deeper non-linguistic sense correct, Hence, Wittgenstein's claim that we see emotion would only have the kind of relevance that it is claimed to have insofar as it is taken to involve an explanation of the nature of mind reading in terms of perception, and not simply to be a reminder of the expressions that we use. Five, explanation versus description. In claiming that Wittgenstein holds that we can see others' thoughts or feelings than what is being attributed to Wittgenstein is a specific explanation of the nature of our ability to read others' minds. This might seem strange, given Wittgenstein's disavowal of explanation in favor of description and his well-known hostility to the idea of theories or thesis in philosophy. For Wittgenstein, in his later work, as in his earlier, there are no philosophical theories or theses as he seeks to practice philosophy, and only a confusion about what philosophy is in that sense could lead one to think that a theory or a thesis could be of any use within that practice at all. And we may not advance any kind of theory. There must not be anything hypothetical in our considerations. All explanation must disappear, and description alone must take its place. Philosophy, as Wittgenstein aims to practice philosophy, consists not of explanations, but of descriptions. The problems that he aims to overcome involve confusions about the grammar of our language. In order to overcome them, he aims to describe that grammar in such a way as to make the confusions disappear. There is then in Wittgenstein's conception of philosophy no role for explanation to play. The only thesis that there could be in philosophy, in this sense, would be trivial. They would involve descriptions of familiar features of the uses of words that we are, despite their familiarity, inclined to overlook. Hence, Wittgenstein writes, if someone were to advance theses in philosophy, it would never be possible to debate them because everyone would agree to them. For Wittgenstein, then, as he describes his own practice, there's no room within it for substantive philosophical views of the kind attributed to him in connection with mind reading. Overgaard, however, describes Wittgenstein's practice in different terms. Wittgenstein is concerned to redescribe subjectivity in such a way as to make intelligible both how it can be something situated in the world and accessible to others, and how, nevertheless, it is given differently from a first and a third perspective. According to Wittgenstein, our philosophical task is to provide a surveyable or perspicuous presentation of how our being with others hangs together with what we are. It is not obvious that this is compatible with Wittgenstein's description of his practice. It is, for instance, not clear how the redescription of subjectivity is intended to relate to or differ from the description of the relevant aspects of grammar. But insofar as it is intended to be compatible with Wittgenstein's description, it should be of no use in defending the attribution to Wittgenstein of the kind of explanation of mind reading that Overgaard, among others, attributes to him. Elsewhere, however, Overgaard and Zahavi are more explicit about the differences between Wittgenstein's description of his practice and their own. It may or may not be that Wittgenstein's grammatical reminders are of little relevance to contemporary philosophy of mind. However that may be, we find a different kind of descriptive approach in much of Wittgenstein's later work. That approach, they continue, offers an account of the mind that will not surface as long as Wittgenstein is interpreted strictly as a grammarian, for its basis is phenomenological. Overgaard and Zahavi refer to this approach as descriptive. But it's clearly not descriptive in anything like Wittgenstein's sense of the word. Irrespective of subject matter, it is essential to Wittgenstein's understanding of his method that it does not involve views that are not simply trivial. It is that, more than anything else, that entitles him to call it descripted. But Wittgenstein's views about mind reading can only have the kind of significance within the mind reading debate that Overgaard and Zahavi wants to have, insofar as they are not descriptive in that sense. Thus, Overgaard And Zahavi's departure from Wittgenstein's understanding of his practice is much more radical than Overgaard and Zahavi aim to make it seem in calling it descriptive. Moreover, understood in these terms, it is again not clear that Wittgenstein has anything important to contribute to the debate of mind reading. Wittgenstein simply reminds us that it seems to us as if we perceive others' feelings, that we do not have the feeling of making an inference. But as with the claim that we use terms such as seeing here, that is not denied by anyone in this debate. And there I put a mark, 1695 and the 24th July, 1430. Very good. Well, it's a difficult thing. Be aware of that. There's a scene in Fawlty Towers where the hotel owner, Basil Fawlty, having problem describing something to the employee, Manuel, and he says in the end, it's not F word, bloody Wittgenstein. Page 679. Third paragraph. Six, seven, nine. So, the page before, I reckon. Yeah. Wait. We have to go up to the top of the page. It's the third paragraph. It also does not seem to us, Wittgenstein writes, as we do in fact, generally speaking, have to infer the presence of, say, fear in another from what we see. Thus, Wittgenstein claims, it is not typically how it strikes us. The phenomenology characteristic of making inferences is often absent. Rather, the feeling often seems to be immediately and visibly present in another's face, is pointing to the immediacy. There is no calculation present, the Russell way, or any of the other analytical philosophers. It strikes you directly. There's no waiting period. And further, Wittgenstein also rejects the idea that we must look inside ourselves or simulate another's movement in some way to recognize their thoughts and feelings. We do not need to look into ourselves to recognize the fury in another's face. So we don't first see an expression, wait a bit, go into ourselves, compare. And if we go down the page, we can go all the way to the next page, actually. The quote is good. It's on the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph. It's a short quote, a bit down on the page. And we may not advance any kind of theory. There must not be anything hypothetical in our considerations. All explanation must disappear, and description alone must take its place. And this is one of those things when we look into life, death, that ulterior cause could be the DNA or the hidden telos, an explanation that is on top of what really happens, before the facts, so to speak. Or after the happening, which is oddly very similar. The Kantian a priori and a posteriori do here completely coincide. And here, just under there, is another good quote to give a hint. Philosophy as Wittgenstein aims to practice philosophy consists not of explanations, but of descriptions. The problems he aims to overcome involve confusions about the grammar of our language. In order to overcome them, he aims to describe that grammar in such a way as to make the confusions disappear. So what does he mean by grammar? It's an extended meaning that Wittgenstein has. It's how we use concepts and words, not a classical pre-arranged law, but what is possible to use. You can see words as tools. And you need to try out a tool or be shown or learn how to use it. And the extent you can make a screwdriver work is its grammar, so to speak, its use, its purpose. Of course, if you like, you can write a rule for the screwdriver. That would be another language game. It is probably in an instruction book and has nothing directly to do with the use of the hammer. Our confusion lies in the idea that there are pre-arranged rules for how words like mind reading or perception or emotion should be used. It doesn't single-handedly aim at another explanation. No, it's more different than that. He is helping you to understand how these words are already working in the language. So it's not a duty or an obligation to use it that way. It's not the Oxford grammar. It is how it is actually used. And we discussed, it's been coming up everywhere in the last 16, coming on 1700 episodes. Cosmological fallacy is definitely one of those grammatical errors. Derrida is also pointing to them in Life, Death, how Bernard and Canguilhem, even more so François Jacob, make those mistakes and therefore creates paradoxes or failures which they try to hide, but it keeps sticking up. So in a way there are some pertinent similarities between Wittgenstein and Derrida. And the comparison in between them goes much further than, for instance, between Heidegger and Wittgenstein. we do not get stranded. And Edward de Bono pointed something similar on that. Thinking can itself not be prearranged or have laws. It should be as symmetrical as to be creative. And you can compare these pre-arranged rules as stone logic, or the idea of using a sort of grid for understanding things. We also discussed that about 200 episodes ago on a restaurant in Stockholm, about the grid that structuralism is enforcing on the language game. Kalle, most welcome. Any comments on your clever mind?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me. Why is this not working? When did Wittgenstein write settle? Let me see. Wow. Settle. But I already mentioned the previous time. It's very confusing that the author of this paper does not make a difference between the young and the later Wittgenstein. So you have to go to the bibliography to distinguish, to see. So, for instance, in the quotation we had Wittgenstein 1970, it refers to a certain book called Zettel, whatever it is. Zettel, it means a slip of paper, published 67. But Wittgenstein was already dead he died 51.
Yes, there is, I would have to add that all the literature of Wittgenstein, except for one or two, were published posthumously. So it is confusing in itself. But you're correct, it would have been better if he would have to have the original publication date. But the original publication date is often misleading when Wittgenstein.
Yes, at least making parentheses the name of the title. That is what is important for us. Wittgenstein 2009, it's Philosophy Investigations, his most important publication. So Wittgenstein 2009 Philosophy Investigations. But okay. But, so let me return to page 6. Page 6. Let me see here. Let me also comment on this quotation. So 2009 is, as we saw, it's philosophy investigations. And we may not advance any kind of theory. All the explanation must disappear and description alone must take its place. Hans, you agree with Wittgenstein that explanation must be foremost. I wonder cautiously, why must it be a either-or question? I say that they occur at the same time. When you describe something, you also explain something. And if you say
yes, of course.
If you say that the man has appeared, it's already it's both an explanation and description, or where do you draw the line?
Of course, no, what you say is correct.
And you said that our mistakes are the pre-rules. This is a tricky question, of course, and you refer to the cosmological fallacy.
I say cosmological fallacy, the writings of Derrida and Feyerabend, and as you mentioned last time, Roland Barthes also.
And the two authors, the lawyer at Harvard.
Oh yeah. Come again now. It will come to my. Thank you. I will remember it.
So the point is that we can compare descriptions with laws and explanations to causality. And as we have seen, laws are secondary and descriptions are secondary. So that is the point. So explanations are like causality, and descriptions would be like laws if you want a primacy. But I think explanations is a little bit misleading. Perhaps the word causality is more correct.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Wittgenstein is using both the words explanation and description very, very specific.
So your paraphrase or explanation was that description corresponds to laws, and explanation corresponds to causality. That is, we think usually that laws are primary, that there are universal laws in the universe, but these two authors of that book, who by these two authors, whatever the name of the book, I think causality is always primary.
You were thinking of Lee Smolin
Yes,
and
Lee Smolin.
Yes, Lee
Yes,
Smolin.
yes.
One single universe. It's called a single universe. Yes.
So can we compare Lee Smolin's argument and Robert Unger's argument to this, or is it off place? That descriptions are like laws that are secondary.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. I mean the other way around. Because Wittgenstein emphasizes descriptions. So Wittgenstein emphasizes descriptions, and they would be like causality.
Yeah. What happens?
Yes. So I take back what I said earlier. I wrote down wrongly here. So descriptions are like causality. They create things, while explanations are like laws.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a very good comparison, because in quantum physics we create things, so to say, with our observations. And when we describe something, I describe somebody, I, so to say, also I create reality in one way. So that is the description. While later, so later you have the explanation, that is the laws.
Definitely. Laws equals explanations. Yeah, it's very good, Kalle. Thank you. Wonderful. Yes. I don't know if, I think I just maybe 20 minutes ago, no, 1 hour and 20 minutes ago, published a video I made about comparing Roberto Unger and Lee Smolin and Wittgenstein, yes. And yeah, very good, yeah, lovely.
Perhaps we should leave it there for today.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for participating, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you everyone for listening in, and have a very nice day, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.